Hey there, welcome to the Uncensored Unprofessor, a podcast where I want to think more deeply with you about Christian faith and life. Hey, all of you believers, you non-believers, you unaffiliated believers, you sort of believers, and even you think I'm a believers. Welcome. This is Dr. Ed Rybarczyk, podcasting here in beautiful Boise, Idaho. I was born in Nampa, about 10 miles to the west of Boise, but I grew up in Oregon, mostly Salem and Bend. And then I went to college and lived in Southern California, Orange County specifically, for 34 years. But now we reside in the Treasure Valley here in Idaho, and one of the things I'm growing to truly enjoy here daily are the clouds. Spectacular clouds, cloud formations, cloud variations playing against otherly shaped and otherly colored cloud variations. If Montana is known as Big Sky Country, I think Idaho should be known at least as Sizable Sky Country. Wow, so beautiful, constantly changing horizons, but constantly beautiful too. And excuse me for such a meandering opening, although beauty is going to be one of my regular topics. But up here they have what are known as autumn blaze maple trees. And the colors are just spectacular, ranging from neon pink to bright red to orangish red mixtures. It feels like you're surrounded with a rainbow-colored paint easel. Those blaze maples are mixed in with the surrounding blue spruces and aspens, towering poplars and oak trees, and all of which are turning a cool lime green, forest green, Kelly green, and mix in some yellows and browns and grays and purples, and oh my goodness, just aesthetically delicious. And I hope wherever you are that you're taking time to find some aesthetic beauty around you in nature. We have this everyday gift called nature. Why do I refer to myself as the unprofessor? Well, the answer is because I'm no longer employed full-time as a theologian. Now, I did not retire. My former institution reported out that I left because I was retiring, but that is in fact not the case. And the honest truth is I'm way too young to retire. I love being busy. I can't sit still. I need to have a purpose and a reason and a project. So I'm not retired. I'm just currently unprofessored. And I want to thank you for choosing to listen today. For now and the next several episodes, I want to think with you about the faith versus reason schism. Schism. Society assumes, and with it too many in the church assume, that faith is a subjective opinion-based choice, while reason is based on pure, unadulterated facts. This supposition, this faith is different from reason supposition, is the cause for much doubt, both outside and inside the church. The faith versus reason dualism purports all kinds of things like this. Religious faith is based on feelings, while reason is based on intellect. Religious faith is based on invisible and unprovable beliefs, while reason is based on visible and provable facts. Religious faith is a personal construction, while reason is a public construction. Or religious faith is a matter of misplaced hope, while reason is a matter of demonstrable argumentation. Still others would say religious faith is a leap in the dark, while reason is a certain path that has been marked over the centuries by people committed to truth. Religious faith is the product of power brokers who want to control our every move, while reason is based on unbiased, unaffiliated, and totally objective thinkers who simply want us to live freely under the truth. And finally, I can say that still worse, religious faith is assumed to be driven by people who want your money, but reason is driven by people who simply want you to know the truth. Now, we could together make a long list of similar comparisons that society, whether religious in orientation or not, would believe to different varying levels. And in every case, the list itself would work diligently to prove that reason is the far superior quality to faith. In every case, the list would show that religious faith is kind of silly, kind of immature, kind of unfounded, while reason is mature, facts-based, and wisely grounded. Today, and in the subsequent episodes in this podcast, I want us to think more nuanced about both faith and reason. Now, before I launch any further, please know I am a huge fan of reason. Passionately, I love reason. Some of my own personal mentors, not only during the years of my formation as a young thinker, but even since I've earned my PhD, are profoundly reasoned people. At school, I had some mentors who were not only deep souls, but genius intellects. And if, as I commonly say, I'm frequently enwrapped by beauty, it's also the case that I'm frequently caught up in the genius of other folks' reasoning power. God created the human race in His image, and when He did so, He gifted us with brains, with the ability to think both from generally held positions into specific considerations, and from specific considerations into generally held positions. We have a built-in capacity to learn from both our errors and our successes. So, very importantly for this faith versus reason discussion, God gave us brains. He also gave us imaginations. You know this, but we can imagine events and their outcomes. We can imagine acts and their consequences. We are able to imagine how other people might feel if we were to say or do certain things. And even imagination then requires the ability to reason. For me, for the church, God created human beings with extraordinary capacities. We can reason and we can think and we can intuit. We can sense when things are just off. We can feel things in our bones that just don't seem right, even though we could not well articulate the thing that we're feeling. So, thank you, beautiful God, for giving us brains, the capacity to reason. If it wasn't for reason, I would have died in a car accident when I was 16 years old. And maybe I'll tell the details of that incident later, but suffice it to say now that I'm alive because there were reasoned people, folks who had exercised their brains sufficiently in order to be able to hook me up to an IV tube and removed a crushed spleen that was bleeding into my lungs and sew back on my mostly cut off left foot and repair my broken back and do most of all that while I was under anesthetic sedation. Anesthesia, right? What a wonderful gift to the human race, and it's the second greatest human invention of all time, second only to the television DVR. I just love being able to watch TV without any commercials. Anyway, back to my hospital experience, those good people had the ability, the capacity to bless me, to use their brains, to have gone to medical school for education, and to have learned the tradition of medicine. Reason has benefited me in deep ways in my life. I'm sure that's true for you. Reason's a good thing. Christians have nothing to fear from reason. Reason is a beautiful gift from God. The church has nothing to fear from reason. Now, reason is not necessarily neutral. It's not a standalone capacity. It is a capacity that is shaped by and informed by all kinds of things, but we'll get to those kinds of issues later. So just as an opener here, and as we think together, I am thankful for reason. My own hope for my salvation is not in reason. My hope is in Christ. My own hope for the human race is not in our ability to save ourselves through reason. My hope is in Christ. My hope for society does not lie in some utopian vision. That hope for me is in Christ and His gospel alone. But despite those kinds of qualifiers, reason doesn't need to be seen as being in some kind of battle with faith. Now, the historical side of the faith versus reason struggle itself is interesting. It wasn't always this way. And just as a quick aside, I truly am fascinated to try to get my head, my understanding, my imagination inside of other worldviews. It's so intriguing to me to think that people didn't always, or probably don't today, people didn't always think the way we all do now in the early 21st century. It wasn't always this way. Faith and reason were not understood as competing capacities. Across human history, most people were simply busy trying to make it through the next winter, gathering and storing enough food so that they and their children could see it through the next spring thaw. They took reality as it was. We today are privileged and perhaps at the same time tortured to think about reality in various penetrating ways, but it just wasn't the case some 300 years ago and back that people were torn apart to consider that reason might be in opposition to faith. I won't take the time to carefully rehearse the historic facts. I mean, we could read an encyclopedia on all of this, a long, penetrating, profoundly deep history, but I do want to help us get into understanding today's cynicism and skepticism, especially about ultimate metaphysical reality. And to do that, there was at least one enormous philosophic shift in Western civilization's history that you should know in order to understand what brought us to this era. How'd we get here? It wasn't simply a lightning bolt. How'd we come to be in the place we are today? Well, that didn't happen for no reason. How'd we come to pit faith against reason? That took centuries to develop, and important for our thinking is a man named Descartes. René Descartes. When you read it, it looks like Descartes, but it's René Descartes. Say aloud Descartes, class. Descartes, teacher. It looks like Descartes, but it's Descartes. Descartes lived from 1596 to 1650, so he died when he was 53 years old. Descartes didn't finish well in the how old was he when he died contest, right? Another quick rabbit trail. It's interesting to me how our own historical era sort of has this notion of the importance of outliving one another. Dude, if you eat that, you're not going to live to be 95. Did I say I wanted to live to be 95? Right? As if the goal of this life is how old one can make it before one dies. Like the folks who are now in eternity stand around asking one another, how old were you when you died? How old were you when you died? Only 48? I beat you by 22 years. I'm all for healthy living, but sometimes I think it's interesting in society we're in this competition to outlive one another, how old we can be. Or on that ground, Jesus of Nazareth lost big time, right? He only made it to 33 or so. Loser. I'm sorry, but I get easily distracted as I think about things like this. Now, Descartes, a Frenchman, who spent much of his life in Holland, is famous for having said in Latin, cogito ergo sum. Put in English, it means, I think, therefore I am. Many of you know that in important ways, Descartes was both the founding father of the scientific revolution. For goodness sake, he was the founder of analytical geometry, and I'm going to confess, I don't have the first clue what analytical geometry is. He's a founding father of the scientific revolution, and he's also one of the fathers of skepticism. What you may not know, what you might not hear in a college lecture, is that he was also a devout Catholic believer. He loved God and actually wanted to try to prove that God exists in order to glorify God. So Descartes, a genius mathematician, wanted to battle the deep skepticism not only about God and Christianity, but the deep skepticism about whether human beings could really and truly know anything at all. Skepticism was already characterizing Europe in the 17th century, and at a Paris conference in 1628, Descartes sought to challenge that prevailing skepticism. In a very clever move, he sought to stand all of that skepticism on its head. If we had been at that conference, we could have heard something like this occur. Descartes stands in front of everybody and says, "You're all worried about doubt. But doubt is the one clear reality. The one thing that is certain," Descartes reasoned, "is uncertainty. It's true," he agreed with the skeptics, "that we might all simply think we know things, but the one thing that we cannot doubt is our own doubt. We can be absolutely certain that we doubt." So his "I think, therefore I am" maxim is a way of saying that I'm aware of my thinking proves that I exist and that I am indeed thinking, right? His logic is that we know existence is real because we're thinking about it, or we know existence is real because we know we are doubting about it. If it weren't real, we couldn't doubt. But we're aware of our doubt, so we know we exist. And now that we know we exist, we can be sure of our knowing, or sure that we know. It seems like an unusual way to spin the situation, maybe for our day and age, but Descartes thought he had figured the way out of all this by grounding our knowledge in doubt. There's so much more to say about the Cartesian, as it is known now in the academy, about the Cartesian strategy. Suffice it now to say that Descartes represents a crucial shift in human history. For centuries, following both Aristotle and then Augustine, people were convinced together about their faith. Augustine had put it this way: "I believe, therefore I can understand." Augustine knew that God knew, and that if God knew and had communicated that knowledge to us, that our knowledge could stand on solid ground. For centuries, faith had been preeminent over reason. We, me, and all of you listening, could talk for hours about how the medieval era, aka the Middle Ages, bore the fruit of 500 years or 1,000 years of Christian faith. The societal developments of the medieval era were enormous, and that they were called the Dark Ages makes it all laughable. The developments of the medieval era were enormous, and they greatly stem from the conviction that faith was prior to reason. Descartes, by placing doubt at the center of his worldview, was overturning some 2,000 years, or maybe it was 1,500 years, of philosophic construction. The irony, of course, is that Descartes did not accomplish what he set out to do. He wanted to ground our knowing in an utterly certain manner, but against his aims, and over time, he unwittingly only made things worse. He wanted to bail civilization out of its skeptical ditch, but he only dug that ditch deeper. And I always find these accidents or ironies in human history fascinating, right? It's amazing to me how we human beings spin ourselves, catch ourselves in the webs of our own making. In our next Faith and Reason podcast, we will explore just how Descartes sought to overcome the enormous skepticism that characterized his own era, but how it unwittingly produced all kinds of outcomes that Descartes himself had not anticipated. So, thank you for listening to me today. Per usual, if you have questions or suggestions or comments and clean jokes, please email me at uncensoredunprofessor@gmail.com, uncensoredunprofessor@gmail.com, all lowercase. Thanks for listening. Turn your brains on, everybody.